In this video, we'll cut some very basic parts using only the saw blade. There are two things we'll need to complete this: good drawings of parts and a good drawing of a slab. To keep things simple, we'll use rectangles. We'll make two rectangles for parts 66 by 26 and a rectangle for a slab 124 by 68. I'll draw the parts first, so I'll choose to draw a rectangle. And I'll start the first corner of my rectangle at 0, 0, since that's the easiest way to draw it. And then I can type in my dimensions, 66 in the X and 26 in the Y. And then I'll move this part over to the left past the X0 point. The bottom left corner of the slab must be drawn at X0, Y0. So I'll choose Move, then select my part and Finish, and then I'll click somewhere on it for a base point, and then move it to the left past the 0, and then click to set it down. I'll just use Copy to make my second part. And again, I'll just click and eyeball it into a location right above the other one. I also need to draw a slab, which is a rectangle. That has to start at X0, Y0, and then I can type in the dimensions of the slab, 124 in the X and 68 in the Y. Next, we'll move the parts onto the slab. I'm going to move the first part accurately into the bottom left corner of the slab, a ½ inch away from the edges. So we'll choose Move, select the rectangle and Finish, and then we'll use the endpoint snap to select this part by its bottom left corner. And I can set it down at 0.5 in the X and 0.5 in the Y. It's recommended to leave a little extra material to cut so that the blade doesn't deflect and you get a nice, smooth saw cut for a finish. I want to move this other part above my first part on the slab. The easiest and most accurate way to do this is to use the Join Parts function from my Voyager tab. If all functions are grayed out on your Voyager tab when you open it, activate it by going to Machine Profile Select and then checking the box next to Voyager. This will enable all functions, including Join Parts Common Line Cuts, which we'll choose. The only setting that we should have selected is Blade Kerf. And then we'll follow the command prompts. My objective is to get this part over onto the slab right above this part separated by the blade's width. When it says select the edge of the part to be moved, I have to click closer to one end of the edge or the other. In this case, I'm going to pick closer to the left side of this bottom edge. And when the command line says select the edge of the part to align it to, I'll not only select this edge, but closer to this end of this edge. And we can see not only are the parts separated by the thickness of the saw blade, but the ends are also aligned so that one saw blade cut will cut both parts. This distance of the spacing between the parts comes from the properties of the blade that we have selected. We can view or change this setting by going to Tool Select and then selecting the blade that is active with the check mark. And here we can see the blade kerf is set at 0.135. So now that we have the parts laid out on the slab, we're ready to make a program. We can apply the saw blade cuts by using the Auto Toolpath icon on our Voyager tab. In this window, we can confirm or change settings. The important settings are at the top. We're programming the Voyager, we're using the BB medium blade, and the material thickness is 3 cm. This bottom section is more for preferences, and we'll talk about a few of them as we go along. For right now, you can set it up the way I have mine. We're prompted to select the geometries to cut. So I'll select my 2 parts, and then I'll finish to automatically have all my saw cuts applied. These blue tool paths represent the middle of the bottom of the blade. And the arrows will show you the direction of the cut if you have them turned on above. Another thing I'd like to do in this first example is to save the right side of this slab as a pre-cut for another job. I can do that by extending this saw cut all the way to the edge, which is easily done with Extend Cuts to Border. Follow the command line. First, select the border, which is the edge of the slab. Then you can select the toolpath to extend, and select which end of the toolpath that you want to extend as well. I can click on this end to extend this way, and this end to extend this way. And after extending all the cuts that we wish, we have a good program that could be run out of the machine. In order to run it at the machine, we'll first need to save it as a file name, which will become the program name. Save your program drawing into a dedicated location. I've created a Voyager program folder to save mine in. And I'll just name mine Test 66 by 26. Do not use spaces or special characters in your file name. And then when we click Save and OK, our drawing now has a name, which will become the name of the program. If the Voyager is connected to the network and all set up and ready, a program will be created and sent to it when we press the Send G-code button. Here, you can add job notes if you wish, maybe what material to use and for what job number, which will be displayed on the job sheet when you press OK. We'll see the program name, which is also displayed as a barcode, which we can scan to load the program out at the Voyager to run it. We also see an approximate runtime. This program, a little over 5 minutes. This is often printed off and brought to the operator to ensure they run the correct program. Let's make another program. This time we'll add 2 more of the parts for a total of 4. We'll start by undoing the toolpaths that we have for the 2-part program. This is easily done by clicking on the Auto Toolpath icon, because we have Auto Toolpath Undo selected. So now, when we click on Auto Toolpath, it undoes all the toolpaths that were already applied. Now I can easily make 2 more copies of the part and set them off to the side to make a similar program with 4 parts instead. I'll use the Join Parts Command Line Cuts feature again to move the parts onto my slab. And I'll choose to keep them separated by the blade kerf. As prompted, I'll select the edge of the part to be moved, again clicking on the edge closer to the one end, and then as prompted, I'll select the edge of the part to align it to, again selecting closer to one end of the edge. And as we see, the part doesn't fit on our slab in this orientation. So I'll undo this move. And I can either pre-rotate the parts, or I can rotate them while using my join parts command line function by selecting the proper edge and end of the part that I want to move to the end and edge of the part that I want to move it to. So I'll choose Join Parts Command Line Cuts, and I'll leave just Blade Curve selected, and I'll pick this end of this edge of the part to be moved to this end of this edge to align it to. And the next part, I'll choose this end of this edge to go to this end of this edge. And I'll finish so that I can choose Auto Toolpath and then select the 4 parts and finish to create another program. And like before, all the toolpaths are automatically applied, including these 2 tight cuts since we have them selected in our Auto Toolpath menu. This is where the blade will stop its X or Y travel and plunge into the table so it can cut closer to the end of the part. I'm going to take us to a side view drawing that I made so we'll have a better visual and understanding of what happens here. The beginning or end of the blue arrow represents the middle of the bottom of the blade. And we normally see this arrow go all the way to the end of our part, which completes our cut. But if there's another part next to it, like we have in our current layout, the blade would cut into that. So therefore, it has to stop short, which would leave an amount of material that wasn't cut. This red symbol of a triangle inside of a circle represents a tight cut. A tight cut will plunge the blade into the table so that it will cut considerably closer to the end of the part. With the parts close together, like we have, there still will be a small portion that doesn't get cut all the way through. This is represented with a red line. So when we see red lines after we've auto toolpathed, it is showing what the saw blade was not able to cut. It's usually a small amount if it's on a straight edge like this one. I'll measure the distance from the end to the end, and it's a very small distance, less than 1 1/8 inches. And if we ran the program like this, we would have to manually finish the cuts. But there are a few different ways to change the program so the Voyager will cut through for us. I'm going to move the 2 parts to the right by about 1 1/8 inches since I have extra room over on the right side. In order to change a program, I first have to remove the cut paths. I'll choose regular undo this time since it was the last thing I did. And I'll press undo twice more so the last 2 parts are back alongside the slab. And this time, when I use Join Parts Command Line Cuts, I'm going to select to specify the distance between parts instead. The distance we measured was just under 1 1/8 inches, so I'll use at least that much. And like before, I'll follow the prompts. I'll select this end of this edge to be aligned to this end of this edge, which still left the bottom edges aligned and also left us 1 1/8 inch gap. This next part, I'll switch back to the blade kerf so the 2 parts will share one cut. Following the prompts, I'll select this end of this edge to go to this end of this edge, to align these 2 parts as they were before, a saw blade's width between them and aligned at the bottom. And we can make a new program by choosing Auto Toolpath, selecting the 4 parts, and then finishing. And as we hoped, these red lines are gone, And since there's no red lines in our entire drawing, it means all 4 parts were completely cut through. And this is a perfect opportunity to show what combined common collinear cuts does when it's enabled. It made one common cut across the bottom of all 3 parts rather than making 3 individual saw cuts. And with them all applied, we can go extend cuts to the border if we wish. First select the border as prompted, and then select the end of the toolpath to extend to the border. And if you click a toolpath randomly a second time, it will automatically extend the other end, which may come in handy sometimes when you want to extend both ends just by double-clicking on the toolpath. But be very careful and select the correct end if you're only extending one end so it doesn't go across a good part. And don't extend the end of a toolpath that has a tight cut applied, or it will remove it. So let's save this file as a different name so we can complete and send the program. I'll just use the name test 66 by 26 and add quantity 4 to the end. And now we can output the program under that name. And you can type notes if you wish before you click OK to make the job sheet. It may take a minute to generate this job sheet, especially if it's the first one. And here, like before, we can see the approximate processing time, a picture of the layout, and the name saved as a barcode across the bottom. Paying attention to the orientation of your parts can increase the yield and reduce runtime. I'm going to change the layout of these 4 parts for what I believe is the most efficient. I'll undo the toolpaths, and then I'll move all the parts off of my material. I'm going to place all 4 of my parts with the vertical orientation like these accurately on my slab. I'll start by choosing Move, selecting one of the parts, and then grabbing it at the lower left corner as the base point and setting that down at 0.5 and 0.5. And then I'll use Join Parts Common Line Cuts to move the other 3 parts in a vertical orientation separated by the blades curve. I'll select this end of this edge and align it to this end of this edge. And then I'll select this end of this edge to align it to this end of this edge. And finally, this end of this edge to this end of this edge. And like before, I'll apply my toolpaths by selecting Auto Toolpath, selecting all 4 parts, and then finishing. With all the saw cuts applied, I can extend them to the border. Choose Extend Cuts to Border, then select the border as prompted, and then the toolpaths I wish to extend. I'm clicking twice on each of these vertical toolpaths to extend both ends to the border. And there are still some cut paths that I want to be particular and only extend one of the ends. Another thing we can do is view or change the order of the cuts. If we turn on Order of Cuts, we can view them in this Operations panel. You may have to expand Operation 1 to view the saw cuts within it. And the cuts are displayed in the order that the Voyager will run. You can view the order by clicking on the first saw cut, and you should be able to see it change color on your screen. And you can either click on the second one or start pressing the down arrow key on your keyboard to view the order of the saw cuts. You can also change the order. I'm going to change the order to cut the long ends of the parts first. And then I'll order the vertical cuts from left to right. First, I'll find the cut by going to Find, and then as prompted, I'll pick the cut from my drawing. This highlights the cut in my Operations panel, and I can use the red arrow to move it to the top. And I'll repeat this process. Find and select the cut, and when it's highlighted, I'll move this one to be cut second. And I'll repeat this procedure for as many cuts as I wish. Changing the order of the cuts may help with keeping the parts from moving while they're being cut at the machine. When you're satisfied, you can click on the top cut and press the down arrow on your keyboard to review the order. Another thing we can do is change the cut direction. I'll change mine so it goes back and forth on the vertical cuts. So I'll select Reverse Cut Direction, and then as prompted, I'll select the toolpaths I wish to reverse. So if I'm going to go in a zigzag fashion, I'll reverse this one and this one. And now I can send G-code again to create a new program. You should always file save as to create a new name for a new program. If you forget, like I'm going to, it may cause some problems. I'll send G-code and skip the notes and just click OK this time. And one of the problems I may see is this message, which means the PDF or job sheet is still open, so it can't be saved under the same name. If I go to my Windows taskbar, I can see that I still have this file open. So the resolution is to close it, and then I can send G-code again so it can reproduce the job sheet. And with this refined layout, I can see that I've reduced my approximate processing time and still creating a good program to finish my 4 parts. Thank you for choosing Park Industries.